Welcome back. In this section, we'll be going over the VLOOKUPs. As I wrote here, it's probably the most important single function we will use, and I absolutely believe that because this is the way that you look up things in columns. This is the way that you connect records between tables like we have here. If you wanted to connect this record to one of the records on this table, a VLOOKUP is how you would connect this to this number right here. Most common use for this is looking up a specific participant or record associated with unique code, like it is we have here. But it can also be used, this is a more niche case, as an in function. And that's one thing that really bothers me about Excel is that there's no in, so you can't say, is this value within 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? You have to, come up with your own ways of doing so, and a lookup, or more commonly a match, but they both can work. Can be used as a sort of in function that you make your own. Now, for the function arguments for the VLOOKUP, it has 4 arguments, which is the lookup value, the table array, the column index number, and the approximate match, which is technically optional, but you do not ever want to leave it optional because that can result in some errors for sure that are hard to catch, and you don't want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and delete the salary right here. And I'm going to show you how to do this VLOOKUP with these arguments. If we go, we type equals VLOOKUP, and as usual, the IntelliSense in Excel will auto-complete the VLOOKUP. If you click Tab, it'll go ahead and complete that and jump you right into the first parameter here, the lookup value. It says here, for the most common use, this usually frequently refer, what is that, English? Usually refers to a cell, there we go, equals VLOOKUP, lookup value. For the most common use, this usually refers to a cell containing some unique identifier, such as a record ID or social security number. So you want to put in here the value that you are looking up, and we are going to be looking up this value right here in our small little table right here of salaries. So for Mr. Hercules Sanford, we are going to look up record ID 5568. And because this is something where if you had multiple lookups, because you're looking at multiple columns in this, you typically want to lock this column. This goes back to the cell references lecture that I went over on the last lecture, but typically I'm going to lock this column right here just out of habit. I know that we're only looking up one field, but it's a good habit to get into. So I locked it. You see the $sign in front of the A. I'm going to click comma, and we're going to go over to the table array, because when we're looking up this value, we need a table that we're looking it up in. And for this table array, we're going to be using this table right here. For the records you select, it is going to look up everything in this entire table. And so you want to make sure that you select all of the data that this record ID might be in. Once again, I'm going to lock this entire table, because if we're doing, multiple VLOOKUPs, you want to have this always referencing this entire table right here. You don't want this table moving around based on where you put the VLOOKUP, because this is the entire data table right here. I'm going to go ahead and read this just in case I missed anything. Array, this is the array. It is a 2-dimensional array, so there's, multiple columns and multiple rows, but it is considered an array containing the column that has the lookup value and the column with the value you want the function to return. Yes, this is the lookup value right here, the record ID, and this is the column right here that we want to return, the 2015 salary. Another important thing to point out about this is that when you're doing a VLOOKUP, the value that you're looking up always has to be in the leftmost column. So we cannot choose this data right here, even though 5568 is right there in the middle, and that's what we're looking up for. This will not return it because it only looks in the leftmost column of the data you chose. You have to choose it like this. The column index number is the column number in the table array containing the value you want to return. For example, if you start an array in column A and the value you want to return is in column D, this argument would be 4. Now, for this one, we started in F and we ended in G, and so this is the first column, this is the second column. We would put 2 here. But there's something I want to show you. It's that I'm going to delete this right here. When you're going to select the data, you will see on the bottom right of that data, it says 7 rows times 2 columns. If you're selecting the exact amount of columns that you need, that 2 columns is the column index number that you will use. So if you go F4, this is 2 columns, 1, 2. We are looking at the second column. And then for the last thing, approximate match. Approximate match will almost always be false. This is probably one of my least favorite parts of Excel, is that 1, they made it optional, and 2, they made the default answer for this true. And that really messes things up, because if you're looking up something where there isn't a precise match in the table you're looking, it will give you an approximate match. And one thing that's really nice about a VLOOKUP is that if there isn't an exact match in the column and you put on false, then it will give you an error. And that is your way of knowing that this record is not in this table. Whereas if you accidentally leave this blank, which can happen sometimes, especially if you're writing longer formulas, or for some reason you put true because you had an error in judgment, it can give you an answer that looks correct because it is returning something, but in fact it is wrong because it's returning something from a different record than what you wanted. And that can be really frustrating with Excel, and I wish to the life of me they would change that, but they are not. So you want to go with exact match almost always. There will be times when you won't want to, but this is not one of those times. You can click Tab to complete it. You just end it with a right parenthesis, and from there we can click enter, and that'll should give us 5568. It should give us this 83,188.17 number, and it does. And as usual, we can Control D to fill this down. It is referencing 5570, the same table because we locked it, and it is now returning the record ID, or the salary for record ID 5570, which is this 53,000 number right here. Perfect, it's working exactly the way we want it to. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult. You'll get plenty of opportunities to use this because, like I said, this is the single most important function. Okay, some notes for this VLOOKUP function. Like I said, the lookup value, which is the very first parameter, this lookup value must be in the first column of the table array, and we already went over that. The VLOOKUP function can only look up a record based on one lookup value. So that means that if we had this table here, if I had to copy this over, I'm just gonna copy the values, and we wanted to also look up based on like the first name, and this was like Steve and Mary and Sam and Hercules. Or in fact, it might make more sense if I do first name, last name, ABC and Sanford. And let's say there might be like multiple Hercules in here. And we wanted to look up this 2015 salary based on both the first name and the last name. It's possible to do in Excel, but it's not possible to do with a VLOOKUP, because VLOOKUPs can only return based on the leftmost column. So I wrote here one workaround. It might be an index match function, which we're going to go over in part 2. It's a more complicated function, but it's also a little bit more flexible. You can do some more interesting things with it. I know another thing you could do is you could just concatenate these two. Just go with this one and this one. So that it concatenates, it squishes these two cells together, Steve A. And then if you bring it down, you could look up your name, your concatenated names in this concatenated column, because that is one column now. And we could do it like that. So if I did that, boom, 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 I looked it up here, 40, the 0 also being false. That's the thing about Excel. In Excel, numerically 0 means false and any other number means true. And anyway, that's one way to look it up also, is you could concatenate multiple columns. That's one workaround, but it's not what I wanted to make this about. I'm making this lecture take forever doing stuff like this. In Excel, true and false are binary operators. This means 0 is equal to false, and any number that isn't 0 is equal to true. Often you will see 0 as a final argument, as I just did. And I wrote, if the lookup value is a number, the corresponding lookup value in the table array must also be a number. Yes. And if the lookup value is a text, the table array lookup value must also be a text. See how the same example above fails when the lookup value is a text. So you see we copy this down right here. And instead of returning 83,000, it is returning this error because this is, as you see here, I wrote this as a text. Because if it's in quotes, then Excel assumes, okay, well, this is a text. So we're going to look for a text in here. It doesn't find the text 5568, it only finds numbers. So it returns an error. Whereas we can get around this, you see if we change it back to a number, it is now returning the answer we want. So let's go ahead and Control Z, put that back to the way it was, and it's an error again. So that's one thing you also need to be careful of, is make sure that your data types are correct. All right, that was a lot to take in. Quick summary. What you want to look up, the table you're looking it up in, how many columns away, the field that you're looking up, and always write false. That's a quick summary of a VLOOKUP. And now we've got a practice problem for you. I wrote, use VLOOKUPs to fill in the following fields from the VLOOKUP PP1, that's practice problem 1, into data tab. So if we go over here, this has all of the data that you will need. And you can reference it in a formula by going equals, going over here, and you see, if you look in our formula bar, it's already adjusted to saying, oh, we're looking up on this tab. And then if you click on the cell right here, it says, on this tab, look at A5. And that's how you can reference data on another sheet, which oftentimes in Excel, things are organized in sheets if you've got data from different sources. So go ahead and look up the first name and the last name for these participants right here. And once you're done, go ahead and click this plus sign. You can compare your solution with the solution I found. All right, best of luck. So for this, if we go ahead and look at our data, we have the participant number right here. And we want to look up the first name and the last name. So we're going to go over here to our practice problem and just say equals VLOOKUP. Go ahead and click this. I'm going to lock in column A, and you'll see that this will be important so that when we copy it over to last name, copy this function over, it'll still look at this participant number. Table array. We can just look at the first 3 columns because that's all we really need for this problem. I'm going to go ahead and select all of it because it's a good habit to get into, because maybe later you're going to want to put, let's see the date of termination right next to it. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this in. So it's looking at all of A4 to M19 on this sheet right here. And then for the column, the first name is column 2. So I'm going to look up 2. And then for the range lookup, you always put false. Lucas. If we look up 778, 778 is indeed Lucas. I'm going to copy and paste that. So we've got the answers for all of these different participants. It looks like it is working. And if I copy this over to last name, it's, well, I was going to say it's working. It kind of is because it's referencing the participant number we want, but it's also looking at column 2. We really want to make sure it's looking at the last name, which as we saw is column 3 right here. 3 being 1, 2, 3 away from participant number. So if we go ahead, change this to 3, Control Enter to keep it in the same cell right here. And now we've got a last name. Barker looks much more last namey than Lucas. We can go ahead and do Control Shift down to highlight everything below this cell. And then we could say Control D to fill it down. So Lucas Barker is that, or let's go ahead and look up Meredith Bryant for 799. 799, where are you? Meredith Bryant. There we go. Looks like it's working really well. If we go ahead and show our grouped columns to see the solution, looks about the same. It appears in this one I used a 0 instead of a false, but overall, pretty similar solution. And I wrote here your first VLOOKUP. Congratulations! Alright, hopefully that wasn't too bad, because we're going to go on to part 2, and these are only going to get more difficult from there.